All right, today we are diving into one of the most powerful and, one of the most controversial tools in all of Canadian law. We're talking about Section 33 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but you probably know it as the Notwithstanding Clause. So let me ask you this right off the top. Can a government legally just ignore your fundamental rights? It's a pretty jarring question, isn't it? In most places, the answer would be a hard no. But here in Canada, the answer is, well, it's complicated. And that complication is sitting right at the heart of our Constitution. It's what we're going to unpack right now. Okay, so let's get into what this thing actually is. In plain English, it's a part of our Charter of Rights that lets a government pass a law that works in spite of certain rights. Think of it like a constitutional override switch that our elected officials can decide to flip. But why? Why on earth would Canada have a tool this powerful and this controversial? To get that, we've got to wind the clock back to when it was created. And believe me, this clause wasn't an accident or some kind of afterthought. It was a very deliberate and very heavily debated piece of our constitutional puzzle. The clause was basically born out of what people call a great political compromise. This was all happening during these really heated negotiations back in 1982 when the Charter of Rights was being created. At the time, the country's leaders were just fundamentally split on a huge question about how we should be governed. And this slide right here, it just lays out that standoff perfectly. On one side, you had provinces digging their heels in for parliamentary sovereignty, this traditional idea that the people we elect should always have the final word. But on the other side, the federal government was pushing for something new, constitutional supremacy. That's the idea that the new charter, as interpreted by judges, would be the supreme law of the land. They were completely stuck. So what was the solution? Well, it was Section 33. And one of its main architects, Roy McMurtry, he put it perfectly. He said it was designed to be a balancing mechanism. It lets the charter be the supreme law, sure, but it also gives our elected legislatures a way to have the last word if they think the courts have just gone too far. It was the one thing, the one compromise, that made the entire charter possible. So it was a compromise, a balancing act. But how does this powerful tool actually work? I mean, what are the rules? Because it's not a blank check. There are very specific rules for how it can be used. Let's break those down. Now, what's really interesting here isn't just what's on the list, but what isn't. The clause can be used on things like freedom of expression, legal rights, and equality rights. But, and this is a big but, it cannot be used to override democratic rights, like your right to vote. It also can't touch mobility rights or language rights. The framers essentially built a protective wall around those, seeing them as the absolute bedrock of the country. And then there's this big number 5. This is so important. Anytime a government uses the clause, a clock starts ticking. The declaration is only good for 5 years. This is called a sunset provision, and it's all about forcing accountability. It means a government that uses this power will almost definitely have to face you, the voters, in an election before they can even think about renewing it. Now, this is a big one. The Supreme Court weighed in on this, and they said something really crucial. They ruled that using the clause is a matter of form only. Basically, a government doesn't have to go to court and legally justify why it's overriding rights. It just has to be really clear and explicit that it's doing so. So the main check on this power isn't a legal one. It's the political price a government pays for telling citizens it's suspending their rights. So, okay, you can see how it was a compromise, but that doesn't mean everyone was happy about it, not by a long shot. From the moment it was created, this clause has been under fire, with critics arguing it's a fundamental flaw in our democracy. I mean, just listen to how constitutional expert Eugene Forsey described it, a dagger pointed at the heart of our fundamental freedoms. Wow, that really paints a picture, doesn't it? It perfectly captures the fear that this clause makes our most important rights totally vulnerable to political games.
The main arguments against it really boil down at this. It weakens the whole idea of having guaranteed rights in the first place. It pushes the courts to the sidelines. And some even argue the backroom deal that created it lacked democratic legitimacy. And hey, this isn't just some abstract legal debate. Think about Quebec's Bill 21, which used the clause to shield its law on religious symbols from certain legal challenges. That brought this whole debate right into people's daily lives.
Okay, but hold on. That's just one side of the coin. There's a whole other school of thought, and it's gaining steam, that argues this clause is actually a vital tool for a healthy democracy.
And this isn't just a fringe idea. This perspective is laid out really clearly in a paper from Osgoode Hall Law School, and it completely reframes the entire debate. It suggests we should stop looking at the clause as an anti-rights weapon and start seeing it as a pro-democracy safeguard.
So here's the core of it. This view challenges the huge assumption that judges and only judges are the ones who should protect our rights. The argument here is that a healthy democracy has multiple ways to guard our freedoms, and that our elected legislatures have a huge part to play in that.
According to this argument, the real safeguards aren't found in a courtroom. They're built right into the democratic process itself. First, any use of the clause has to be openly debated in a legislature. Second, that debate comes under intense public and media scrutiny. And finally, and this is the big one, that 5-year sunset clause ensures electoral accountability. Ultimately, the voters, that's us, get the final say at the ballot box.
So, where does all this leave us? Well, it leaves us smack in the middle of a huge, profound, and still very much unsettled debate about the very nature of Canadian democracy. And there are no easy answers here, folks.
It really boils down to two totally different ways of looking at this. Is the clause a dangerous constitutional flaw, a weak spot that leaves our most basic freedoms at risk? Or is it an essential democratic safety valve, an insurance policy that makes sure that in the end, the people we elect have the final say on the laws that govern us?
And that brings us to the one final question that this clause forces every single one of us to think about. When there's a deep disagreement about our fundamental rights, who should we trust to have the final word? The courts or the politicians? The answer to that question really defines the kind of democracy we have.